Before 1993, no one had ever heard of undercooked meat being able to kill someone. But all that changed when one little girl was rushed to the hospital poisoned by fast food. And now there's a new book about the true story of that deadly E. coli outbreak and how it changed the way we eat here in America. It's called Poisoned. And this morning I'm joined by the author, Jeff Benedict. Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning.
You're actually from East Lyme, Connecticut.
I am.
And now you moved to Virginia. Talk about what started all of this interest in E. coli and food for you.
Well, when we moved to Virginia a few years ago from Connecticut, we bought an old farm that was built during the Civil War. Had no intentions of actually farming, but my wife decided to convert it to an organic farm. It changed the way we eat, and I started looking more seriously at food, particularly at foodborne illness outbreaks. It's something I never really paid attention to before, but suddenly I was, and it got me really interested because I have young kids.
Right.
We were growing our own food, and I started looking at outbreaks, and I ended up looking at Jack in the Box.
So having young kids and then researching, what was that like for you? Talk about the first outbreak, because this happened to a 6-year-old girl, right?
Yeah. When this started in 1993, at first no one knew this was an E. coli outbreak. The first death was in San Diego, where Jack in the Box is headquartered. But it didn't become an outbreak until Seattle, when dozens and dozens of kids showed up in Children's Hospital over a weekend, and all with the same symptoms: bloody diarrhea, uncontrollable cramps. And luckily, the doctor on call there was the top specialist in the United States on E. coli. He was educated at Yale Medical School. If it wasn't for him being there, it's a good chance that a lot more kids would have died. But the Seattle outbreak made it to the national news. It was on all the networks, night after night. President Clinton had been in office just a few days, and suddenly there was the biggest foodborne outbreak in contemporary history.
What does that say about the way we make our food, that this is happening in the past 20 years and we had never heard about it before?
Yeah. Well, the big thing, I think, is that E. coli was a word, it's a dirty word today. We don't like that word. But in '93, it was a word none of us knew. This case made it a household word. You got to think, how did this start? Well, prior to the 70s, cattle in this country weren't fed corn. They were fed grass, which is what they're naturally bred to eat. And they don't have the enzymes to kill E. coli when your diet is all corn. And so this new germ emerged that's now in a lot of our food. It's not just in beef. It's in bagged lettuce, it's in raw milk, it's in cheese, it's in cilantro, it's in all kinds of things. But it started with cattle.
So what do we do to stay safe when we're going to the grocery store or buying food for our kids and whatnot? What do we need to be looking for?
Well, when it comes to meat and poultry, what I say, after working on this book for 2 years, is that the safest thing is to buy your meat and your chicken from local farms, from farmers markets. People say, well, how do you do that? Well, it's not as hard as it used to be. Connecticut, for example, there are some terrific organic farms that raise beef and chicken. We used to get our beef in Old Lyme, Connecticut, when we lived there. There are places around the state where you can get it. The benefit of that is you can go to the farm, you can meet the farmer, you can see the cow,
right.
You know where your meat's coming from. Outbreaks like I documented and Poisoned are because there are hundreds of thousands of pounds of ground beef being mashed together in these huge facilities, and if you get a little bit of contaminant in there from a bad batch, suddenly it's in all the meat, and it ends up in packages that go all over the place, and they become really hard to track.
So you're going to do a book signing, a book talk tonight at R.J. Julia Booksellers. This is at 6:30 in Madison. Definitely an event you don't want to miss, and definitely a book you want to read. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. I can't wait to read the book.
Appreciate it.
Logan, over to you.